Kizamde, hop on the beat!
Welcome back to Debunking Araki Forgot. This time we'll be taking a look at more topics that have yet to be covered, as well as ones I feel like need more fleshing out. A few months ago, I was finally able to complete the debunking video for the 8th part, JoJolion. Now that that's out of the way, these extras videos have the opportunity to cover topics from JoJolion that I might have missed. The first topic involves Dio. They ask why Dio didn't use his hypnotism again like he did against Jack the Ripper in part 1. The answer is that he never really stopped doing this. Dio continued using his supernatural powers of charisma to recruit allies in part 3. However, some people need more convincing than others. Dio's dialogue in the scene with Jack gives us a clue. He mentions that most people have some amount of good in their hearts. This may mean that good people are less susceptible to Dio's hypnosis. We learned later that Kakyoin fell under Dio's charisma when they first met. However, the effects of this are temporary. Avdol was also enamored by Dio's presence when he encountered him in Egypt, but was able to break free and run away. This is the reason Dio used the flesh buds on Kakyoin and Polnareff, which were able to maintain hypnosis in stronger-minded people even from long distances. For others, such as Jack and most of the enemies in part 3, hypnosis either took complete control or was unnecessary. I'd also imagine that Dio derives some kind of sick satisfaction from controlling people with means other than hypnosis, such as the fear he used to control Whole Horse. Another question asked why flesh buds do not die in sunlight. The simple answer to this is that they do. After Enya's death, we saw her flesh bud disintegrate in the sunlight when it was removed and exposed to it. But what they're most likely asking is why the flesh buds aren't affected while still inside the hosts. In that case, I think the fact that they're obscured underneath the host's hair is enough to shield it from the sun. In the fight against Mariah, Joseph's hands are crushed by the escalator and both of them are seen bleeding. Some ask how this is possible, since one of these hands is actually a prosthetic. The answer is that this isn't blood, but actually the oil used to maintain the prosthetic hand. Joseph's hand is based on the technology of Stroheim's cybernetic body in part 2. When he was damaged by cars, he also appeared to bleed as well, despite being mechanical. Additionally, in the anime adaptation of part 3, the oil from Joseph's hand is actually colored differently from his blood to reflect this. Over time, I've gotten a ton of comments popping up asking questions related to the visibility of stands. Like how Anne was able to see Strength despite not being a stand user, or how Shinobu was able to see Stray Cat. I honestly just don't understand these kinds of questions. Now, I can understand if someone is asking this about the first couple of visible stands in the series when they're first starting out. But from just naturally going through the story, you would become familiar with the concept of stands that inhabit physical objects. I just have no idea how someone could go all the way through a series that has Strength, Yellow Temperance, Empress, Wheel of Fortune, High Priestess, Geb, Khnum, Toth, Anubis, Surface, Love Deluxe, Earth, Wind and Fire, Stray Cat, Superfly, Mr. President, White Album, Notorious B.I.G., Metallica, Oasis, Rolling Stones, Burning Down the House, Foo Fighters, Oh Lonesome Me, Cream Starter, Tomb of the Boom, Tubular Bells, Paper Moon King, Scott Key No. 1, Dr. Wu, and Wonder of You, and still not understand that there are stands which are visible to non-stand users. And I'm honestly being a bit generous and leaving out some more stands that could be on there. That's 30 stands. Of the 168 that have been featured in the main series thus far, that's a pretty sizable number, so it's just strange to still be asking about it as if any given visible stand is an oddity when really they're exceptionally common. Next is a comment I got regarding Avdol's father. One person claims that during the Judgment arc, Avdol's father was introduced as a new character. They say that originally, Whole Horse was set to replace Avdol in the group. But then at some point, Araki was forced by his editor to change this, and made Avdol be revived instead with the excuse of Avdol being disguised as his father. However, this idea not only has no actual proof behind it, but it also has multiple direct statements from Araki contradicting it. In the JoJonium Volume 13 interview, Araki talks about Avdol's fake-out death. and says that when he first wrote it, he already knew he was going to bring back Avdol in the future. So the idea that Avdol was originally going to stay dead and that some last-minute change was made is completely unfounded. Next is the idea of Whole Horse getting rejected in favor of Avdol coming back. This also has no proof. It is true that for a time, Araki was considering having Whole Horse join the group. He talks about this in the Jojonium Volume 10 interview, and goes over his initial idea for having Whole Horse join. However, he goes very in-depth on his actual reasons for not going through with this idea. First, that he would throw off the balance of the group, and that his ability was too powerful due to its lack of limitations. He goes on to say that he instead chose to add Iggy to the team, since having a small animal character created a better balance for the group than another human would. So this whole idea of there being some malicious editor hovering over Araki controlling his every move is just completely ridiculous. Especially when we have evidence of how friendly Araki was with his editor at that time. In fact, if anything, I would think that if there were an editor controlling Araki's writing, then the opposite would be true. In the Jojonium Volume 13 interview, Araki even says that Avdol wasn't that popular of a character. If I were an editor only concerned with what was more popular, I think actually having the fan-favorite character Whole Horse join would be the more likely option. So the idea of Whole Horse getting shot down in favor of Avdol is really unlikely, beyond the fact that we already know the exact reasons for these changes. Now, most normal people would just hear this long list of direct quotes from Araki and accept that their ideas are wrong. But some people are just too stubborn, since as we see here, some would rather say that Araki is lying in interviews to cover up for his mistakes than just accept that they're wrong. I got one question asking why they didn't just restrain Steely Dan in Part 3 to prevent him from injuring himself to hurt Joseph. However, this would do absolutely nothing about the spore growing inside of Joseph's brain, which was going to grow and kill him in the next 10 minutes. The whole reason that they left Jotaro with Steely Dan was to keep him away while they worked to defeat the Stand and remove the spore. One question asks why Vanilla Ice became a vampire instead of a zombie, since zombies are created by having a vampire's blood injected into them. This one has a pretty simple answer, since zombies aren't created using a vampire's blood. They're created when a person is injected with vampiric essence. Vampires in JoJo have a separate fluid inside of them that they inject to create zombies. As we saw in Part 1, this was different from blood. Vanilla Ice was revived with the actual blood of a vampire, which is why he became one and not a zombie. Some have asked why at the end of Part 3, Dio was unable to move inside Jotaro's time stop, when earlier, Jotaro was able to move inside of Dio's time stop. This is because moving within someone else's time stop also depletes from your own time-stopping abilities. For example, Jotaro can stop time for a maximum of 5 seconds. If Dio were to stop time for 10 seconds, and Jotaro chose to move within stop time, then he only has those 5 seconds of movement until he's frozen again. What happened at the end of Part 3 was that Dio stopped time for the longest duration that he could to attack Jotaro. But then, immediately after the time stop ended, Jotaro stopped time on his own. Since Dio had already used up all his movement, he was now frozen in Jotaro's time stop. Another bunch of questions I've gotten ask about why Jotaro and Dio sometimes say the name of their stand when they stop time, while at other times they don't. I'm really disappointed that I even have to address something like this, since I just have to wonder if people who ask things like this have seen literally any other anime in their life. As if a character saying the name of the attack they're doing isn't just a common trope in any shonen anime ever created, as opposed to some kind of actual requirement for the use of their ability. The same thing applies to whenever I get a question asking how it's possible for Dio to be monologuing during a time stop. As if they think every 5-second long time stop should be accurately represented in real time in the episode. I would think that as a species, we're beyond the why do they scream so much in Dragon Ball school of media criticism. In the last video, I went over why when a person is pierced with the arrow, only certain people can transfer the power of stands to their family members. This is because this only occurs in families that have a strong psychic bond, such as the Joestars, which is why when Koichi was pierced with the arrow, his family members were not affected. However, I got a comment saying that the actual reason was because Koichi was pierced with a regular stand arrow, and not the beetle-decorated stand arrow that was used to awaken Requiem. Now, I've already made a video going over the beetle arrow, and how I think it doesn't actually have any specific power over the normal arrow like a lot of JoJo fans think it does. But regardless, this logic is completely flawed. While it is true that in the Part 6 example of Stan's awakening and family members this arrow was used, the comment assumes that Dio used the beetle arrow on himself to awaken the Joestar Stans. This is completely unfounded since we have never seen the moment when Dio awakens his stand, which could have occurred with any of the 5 arrows Enya had purchased from Diavolo. Furthermore, Trish is also likely to have awakened her stand through her psychic link to her father, since they're shown to be able to sense each other just like the Joestars do. However, we also have no idea what arrow Diavolo used to awaken King Crimson, let alone when he actually awakened the stand. If it was before he sold the arrows, then there are 6 different ones that could have done it, and if it were after, then he only would have had access to the normal arrow that he later gave to Pulpo. So really, this whole idea of the beetle arrow having any influence over this has no evidence behind it. It simply boils down to whether that person is part of a special family that has a psychic link. For Part 4, some ask why Josuke had to punch through Tomoko to remove Aqua Necklace, when it was shown in Part 3 that stands can phase through bodies, like when Jotaro pumped Joseph's heart. I don't see how this would apply to this situation at all, since it's not like Jotaro removed Joseph's heart or anything. Aqua Necklace is a physical stand which occupies existing fluid, so if Josuke were to try and remove it without punching through Tomoko, he would have to somehow pick it up with Crazy Diamond's hand and bring it up back through her throat. Josuke obviously wanted Tomoko to not know what was going on, which is why he punched and healed her in one go so she never felt anything. Also, Josuke punched with a broken bottle and then fixed it to trap Aqua Necklace. If he were using this other method, that would not be possible and the stand would simply escape his grab. This next topic has to do with a question I've gotten a lot over the years relating to Crazy Diamond's ability. In my Debunking Rocky Forgot Part 4 video, I go over why Josuke couldn't repair the button from Kira's jacket to track his location. There I said that because the button was separated from the jacket without any of the connecting thread, it became a separate object and wouldn't be able to be fixed back. Some people have brought up the scene during the Harvest fight where Shigechi unscrewed nuts and bolts from the pipe and Josuke was able to use Crazy Diamond to bring them back. They say that the nuts and bolts should be considered separate from the pipe like the button is. Talking about this topic in general means we need to get into the minutia of Josuke's ability, which is a tricky topic. Essentially, since his ability is to fix things, whether he can do that or not entirely hinges on whether that thing is broken, and the definition of broken is pretty lax at times. I actually consider this to be a flaw with Josuke's ability, since it makes pinning down exactly what he can and cannot do very difficult. For example, time is often a factor in whether something is considered a piece of another. During the final battle, Josuke's blood dried and was now considered a separate object from Josuke himself, but not separate from the rest of the dried blood on Kira's jacket. So it's very possible that the time since the button's removal was enough time for it to be considered separate, and the nuts and bolts were fixable since they were only just removed. Like I mentioned earlier, we also need to figure out what exactly constitutes as an object being fixed. In my opinion, the actual state of the object itself counts when it comes to this. The pipe is suspended above ground by the nuts and bolts. In this state, the bolts are an integral part of the state of the object, since without them the pipe would fall. While on the other hand, in my opinion, the button itself isn't integral to the state of the jacket. For these reasons, it's difficult to actually determine any exact answer for when the button is or isn't considered part of the jacket. I'm not even sure at this point if the button is completely unfixable back to its origin. It's a definite possibility that it still is. So I would also like to pose a separate explanation for the button problem since that's where all this arose from. In my original video, I also mentioned another part of the argument, that since the button is so small, it would be extremely difficult to follow back to Kira. As we saw later, even when following his hand, it was an ordeal for them to keep up with it. Something like the button would be even harder to follow, and not only that, if they did lose track of it, they'd be missing their only clue to Shigechi's death. It was a smarter idea overall to track the origin of the button itself to the tailor, which did lead them straight to Kira with a lot less effort and risk. I got one comment asking what happened to Kira's hand after it left the Cinderella salon during Kira's escape. Well, considering the fact that Kira has 2 hands for the rest of Part 4, it's pretty easy to figure this one out. Especially considering that the entire purpose of the scene with Kira's hand is that it was fixed by Crazy Diamond and went back to Kira. And as if it wasn't clear enough, the narration explicitly states that Kira still has his original fingerprints on one hand, showing that the hand reattached itself to him. Near the end of Part 4, Hayato calls Josuke to come meet him, which results in him discovering Kira's identity and forcing him to deactivate Bites the Dust. I've gotten some questions asking how Hayato got Josuke's phone number to be able to do this. Well, as we saw in the previous loop, Josuke told Hayato his full name, but how would Hayato be able to get his phone number from this? Well, believe it or not, there used to be this mystical artifact called the phone book, where you can find someone's phone number based on their name. This next question has to do with Part 5. They ask why when Giorno removed the key from the turtle to expose Babyface, that Trish and Bucciarati weren't removed as well since they are living things. However, this is ignoring the properties of Babyface's ability that Trish and Bucciarati were under. His ability is to rearrange living things into inanimate objects. It's even pointed out that Giorno's ability, which is to turn objects into living things, is the exact opposite of Babyface. So since Trish and Bucciarati were in their rearranged state, they weren't really considered alive, and so wouldn't be expelled from the turtle room. This was all directly explained in the scene in question, since while Babyface was in the form of an object, he was still holding onto Giorno's eye, which was alive, which is the reason why he was brought out of the turtle. Some have asked why during the Grateful Dead fight in Part 5 that they didn't pour the cold drinks on themselves to keep cool instead of just using the ice. This is answered in the story itself, since the whole reason they find out about the ability in the first place was because they already drank the drinks, which slowed the aging of some of the team. Here's another one related to Part 5, but this technically doesn't have anything to do with Araki. This question is about the JoJo light novel Purple Haze Feedback, which takes place after Part 5 and tells a story with Fugo as the main character. The book has a lot of callbacks to some of the more minor characters in Part 5. For example, the son of the character Pericolo makes an appearance and now works for Giorno. Another one of these is that the characters of Sale and Zucchero both make appearances in the book. However, I've seen a lot of people ask how this is possible, since both characters died during Part 5. Well, as these people are clearly not aware, neither of them died. In Part 5, Bucciarati says that the two are just knocked out and were left in the boat. In Zucchero's case, this isn't really an issue at all, since despite being decapitated by Sticky Fingers, he was clearly still alive during the torture scene, showing that the zippers don't really count as a wound. And for Sale, while he was shot in the head, Mista remarked at the end of the fight that his stand was still able to stop the bullet right on time, and that he was simply knocked out. Now obviously this doesn't really count as an Araki Forgot topic since Purple Haze Feedback wasn't written by Araki, it was written by Kohei Kodono. But people seem to underestimate Kodono's knowledge of JoJo when really he has a great eye for the small details. Some have asked why in the Goo Goo Dolls fight, Jolyne was able to cover up a camera with her strings when, as we saw earlier, non-stand users are unable to see her strings. This isn't really an issue in the manga since no such scene happens. The shot of the camera being covered is a mistake that only is made in the anime. Others ask how Thunder McQueen was able to see and hear Whitesnake when presumably Whitesnake is a non-visible stand. This question actually has more to it than it seems. First, oddly enough, it's actually somewhat likely that Whitesnake is a visible stand. At first we'd assume it isn't, since they don't draw too much attention to it. But later during the scene in the courtyard, we actually see that Whitesnake needs to retreat when it hears the guards approaching nearby. So it seems that Whitesnake actually is a visible stand. Most likely, he's physically made up of the same melting acid material that is produced by his ability. His early appearances also reflect this, with him appearing to be melting just like the acid. I got one comment asking why Pucci didn't come to Egypt after Dio told him to. Well, he did. It had already been stated in prior flashbacks that he did go to Egypt to meet Dio. In fact, he did it multiple times. Some ask how Pucci and Weather had a strong enough psychic link to both be affected by the arrow when they didn't even know each other at the time. However, whether or not two people with a psychic link actually know each other has nothing at all to do with the arrow's power being transferred through it. In the best known example of this, Dio pierced Jonathan's body and that awoke Stans and all the Joestars. Neither Dio nor Jonathan knew any of the Joestars, especially not the completely estranged ones like Josuke and Giorno. So this has no bearing whatsoever on the strength of a psychic link. Some ask why in Part 7, Johnny first seems like he barely knows Diego, but later it was revealed that they had competed against each other. However, Johnny never actually acts like he doesn't know Diego. In fact, it seems like he knows a ton about Diego and tells Gyro a bunch of things about him. Some of the things he tells Gyro are rumors that he'd heard, but this doesn't really conflict with anything, since it's not like he would intimately know every detail of Diego's life just from racing against him before. In my recent video going over JoJo fun facts, I mentioned how Johnny Joestar is the only main character whose birthmark has not been shown in any media. This has led some people to say that Araki forgot to draw Johnny with one. However, this argument doesn't really make sense, since it's not like we ever saw Johnny without the birthmark. He simply never had a scene where it was exposed to give us the opportunity to see it. This is exactly the same situation as Josuke in Part 4. His birthmark is never visible in the original manga, since we never saw him without his shirt. However, the anime later added a scene that did show it. So I expect that we'll see something similar in Part 7's anime adaptation. Regardless, even though we don't see it, it has actually been mentioned in the manga that Johnny has the birthmark, since Lucy Steele mentions it in the flashback near the end of Part 8. I got a comment asking why in the fight with Mandem, the marks that Johnny made on the tree remained even after time was reversed. However, this isn't what happened here. The marking of the trees was never actually reversed. What happened was, Johnny marked a tree every time they made a turn, but Ringo would rewind time before their intended turn, making them turn earlier and having Johnny mark the wrong tree. Then they would walk forward some more, get reversed, and then mark the wrong tree again. So the marking was never undone by this, only the time they spent moving forward. During the In a Silent Way fight, Sandman placed his sound ability onto Diego's dinosaurs so that they could be sent after Johnny and Gyro. However, I got some comments asking why Diego and Sandman bothered to combine their abilities, since Sandman can already create his own creatures with his stand. This is because it was important in this fight for him to make use of the additional benefit of Diego's dinosaurs, which is that they can actually track their targets by scent, making them more useful for attacking. One comment I got has to do with a scene in JoJolion. They ask why in the family tree scene, when Josuke checks Kira's phone, there was a search for his own father, when Kira would have already known his own father was dead. However, this is not what's happening here. First of all, Josuke isn't checking Kira's search history, he's typing the name in himself after reading it from the book. Since the father is dead, a couple pages later he searches for Holly's name instead and gets a result. When he says Kira was investigating this, he's not talking about the search, he's referring to the bookseller's mark, which Kira had investigated to sneak into the Higashikata house and erase Kei's name from the book. Also, this isn't actually Kira's phone that Josuke is using, it's Daya's phone, which he took for himself in the previous chapter. And that's all of the Araki Forgot topics for now, but I'll be back with another video at some point to go over more uncovered topics. If you want to suggest a topic for me to cover, comment it down below, either in your own comment or in the pinned comment thread that will remain under this video. However, I ask that you refrain from leaving a ton of replies to people in that thread, since it will make it very difficult to find the questions later and could cause the thread to reach the maximum number of replies. If you want to be updated on new videos and chapters or leave suggestions, join the Hamen Beat Discord using the link in the description. To receive rewards like Discord perks and some uncut videos, you can support the channel on Patreon. And finally, for future videos, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and up patrons. Thank you to Alex Ramirez, Doorbell, Ashton Joseph Miller, Crayon, Rigo Vids, Zukato, Sentai, Pumpkin Doge, Mero, Almighty Quarth, Oof, Cowrie, Halil, Gatlin Grove, and Vess.